All right.
Yeah, is this where essences become a big deal?
Say that again?
Where essences become a big deal, where everyone's like, oh no, essences.
Mm,
Essences are bad. We can't have essences.
mm,
You know what I'm
mm,
saying?
mm.
Like, I don't think Sartre even does that. Like,
Uh-huh.
so it's probably something before Sartre even. But I was talking to an AI yesterday and I was like, sometimes I just want to say, boys can be boys, and they were like, you can't really say that these days. Can't really say that these days. Because it's like you're saying, oh, it's a loaded statement. Oh, it conjures in all these other assumptions. And it's like, sometimes I just want to speak like a human. Sometimes I just want to speak like it.
Mm. Well, if there is one entity that is without an essence, surely it is a large language model.
Truly.
Um, so he would that would be a conflict of interest, I suppose. Yeah, please go ahead. Or no. I mean, at least if I can extrapolate from Steve's comment, the formula existence before essence or the essence's existence is related to this notion of a motor. I mean, I guess my real I mean the second part of the question is maybe the the most on my mind. Why would it be necessary to think in those terms at all?
Oh, hello. Is this mic terrible?
No, no, sounds good.
Okay, cool, cool. Okay, yeah. As I wrote in the chat, I mean, for me, it's pretty obvious reading him and then reading the Levi-Strauss right after that.
Hmm.
He's making an argument as to why he's not, or why we are not the savage society, where he sees only like sort of plain repetitions and like a sort of accumulating history.
Hmm. Yeah, so there's a kind of overcoming of inertia, I guess, that is assumed for our modern position. And I guess it's that which serves as the condition for theorizing active inertia. So all human societies on an equal plane uh, in terms of scarcity. Um, but then there's a certain accrual, theoretical and practical accrual of a crisis for us, which is that of having to theorize history, uh, something like universal history. And it's at that point that scarcity is, I mean, inertia is an important category. It's not, it's not present in Aristotelian physics in the Western tradition.
Right. I
Uh,
mean, I guess the like the sort of inertia, like what is it, the practical inert object he's talking about. It's a way to explain how like material conditions can act against man. I think he uses like the term like demonic force at 1.2 when
hmm
describing this.
hmm
Whereas I think he's contrasting that to maybe that in the sort of primitive society, like there are still these. I mean, I'm not sure if you would think that there is like actual sort of more complex symbolizations happening to like facilitate communication, like a sense of identity or whatever, kind of like that example Levi-Strauss brings up of, sort of going to like a primitive tribe and like seeing that, oh, like we can map out our like family trees, like we have concepts of all these things, like we aren't
Hmm.
just sort of acting in like sort of blind reaction to the things around us.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I guess there it's that might sort of be it, where he's trying to argue against that we're sort of reacting to things like ad hoc, and in a
Hmm.
way we are experiencing history um, as like something that acts against, like, I mean, really what's happening is like he's sort of he's like redoubling um actions that take place on like a almost like like a transcendental like kind of plane almost, and like that is like a force on us rather than sort of seeing things more like all happening on the same sort of playing field almost. And I think that might tie into why he has this one part where he's talking about how the only thing that's like sort of doubled within the social field is meaning, but not praxis. So he's trying to argue against that there could be sort of multiple praxises or whatever. I don't know the
Hmm.
plural. That could that could actually like not encounter each other and not act against, like just be like entirely separate things going on. So I think he's trying to like tie everything up into like a single field that like requires like the redoubling in history.
Hmm. That's very good. I have thoughts, but in response, but did anyone want to go first?
I'll go.
Hmm.
Okay, so like Levi Strauss, I kind of view as like the ultimate hippie. And what I mean by that is like, okay, man is like natural, man is like, you know, bad also. Or no, wait, no, not bad. Okay, what I'm trying to say is like, um, I've been getting in these fights or whatever online with these other people who think like there's basically like in the Genshin Impact community, there's like people who are like, okay, this god came down and whatever, and he was human, and he put humans on Earth, but dragons were there before, and dragons are obviously, humans are colonizers or whatever is what they say, and I'm sort of like, okay, but then you're elevating the natural, the pre-human, the pre-law, or whatever, something like that to some sort of like um, ethical standard, that may want to kill us. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if that's somehow related to this, but I feel like it might be. But I
You
feel
know,
like
in the context of Genshin, I mean, how much do you know about the lore? Because I know like the second Descender is the one that brings humanity, but she's
yes,
like an
that's what I'm
ally
talking
to the
about.
Dragon Sovereign. Like they're actually not opposed to each other. What happens is it's not them, it's sort of just how things shake out of the humans and the heavenly principles and the dragons start fighting for control over Teyvat. But I mean people are just to sidebar that entire game, people are not able to read it as a narrative like at all. They only see the sort of vague ideas of the categories of like colonizer or colonized, especially. And okay, no, we don't have to get
Exactly.
into
I'm
that
just
stuff,
sad.
but there's
I'm
a
just
lot.
glad someone gets what I'm saying somehow. So
So do the humans and the dragons have the same history, or do they have distinctive histories?
they have
Well, the
distinct
humans
histories.
are from like out of like the world of the game. They're like brought in because they're the second descenders sort of treating that as like a Noah's Ark for humanity's continued survival.
So is the game you fighting against the dragons that in order to colonize their planet?
No,
No, that all happened like thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. Yeah.
I see. But you're fighting like all the time, right? In the game. So who are you fighting against?
Just like
past
different
humans
factions on the
sometimes.
planet, past humans, monsters, etc., etc. There's no
I
like
see.
actual overarching like big bad.
I
Um,
see. So it's a kind of you're the history you're playing in is a kind of anarchic condition.
It's
Yeah,
more
just because
like
like the planet's like it's just like a world. It's just a planet. You got
it's more
cities, you
like a
got
demiurgic. You're put there by humans are put there by like a demiurgic entity called the primordial one, who
yep.
was the second who came. The dragons were there originally, so the dragons are sort of treated like Native Americans by some fans. Is how I'd put it. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, yeah.
But that's not. But in terms of oh, I mean, you can just go ahead. You don't have to raise your hand.
Uh, no, you can finish. I was gonna. I'm kind of forgetting what the initial question was, so I just wanted to kind of bring us back to that. Maybe I'm just
Okay.
getting a little.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah, we can do that.
but I mean, basically, I guess what I wanted to say, and I maybe just with the opening of that, uh, of the Sartre. Um, this is something I've been kind of thinking about in different terms, at least scarcity. But this idea of the inert universal memory, it's very interesting to me, at least in terms of. I'm kind of forgetting exactly what you said about inertia, but I guess the kind of the social inertia that lives in the whatever the worked matter here, and work matter, I guess, is some sort of like the things that the humans carry out in the world. And I kind of the most abstracted version of that is information to me, or
Hmm.
that's kind of how I compute it. And like the whatever the civilizational stack as the as humanity's uh whatever historical development goes, like that kind of the information that gets accumulated is what uh I guess and this is where I was getting a little confused, is that when we talked about the engine of history, right, and
Hmm.
scarcity being the engine of history, it seems like it gets more complicated because there's like this kind of inert universal memory is functioning also as kind of like a passive dimension to the engine of history or something like that. Whereas the active version, and I guess it's kind of closer to the actual scarcity, is like the whatever the fact that the social uh, dimension cannot be, or like the way we relate to the other is because it kind of subtracts from our lot or something along those lines, is
Hmm.
how I was understanding it, and that's why this is kind of the motion. But nonetheless, like there's that kind of like the contingent dimension to to the to the scarcity, I guess. Like at any one point of history, and this is kind of I recently was fighting some Malthusians on Twitter actually, and this is where it's making me kind of think
Hmm.
about. And like the whatever the contingent scarcity or whatever at any point in human civilization, what is scarce is different. But
Hmm.
nonetheless, there is still that it bears down on the social structure, and which to me, how I've interpreted my own is just like, well, then scarcity is inherently a social problem. It's not actually something in the world, or what he maybe what Sartre is calling what are pure non-human inorganic matter that the social is interfacing with. And the I guess the the problem with turning it into a social structure is that then at least to me it doesn't seem like the problem is scarcity itself, but scarcity is some sort of, it's symptomatic to kind of a relational dynamics or something like that.
Hmm.
Right. I
um
mean, I think that's the exactly the point he's making in the first couple pages because he's talking about how scarcity is like the relation of our history, but not history itself. Like it's a contingent way that, our history has turned out. But I mean, he's repeats over and over that like scarcity is like, I mean, this is like the first time he like says it over here. I have it highlighted. Like scarcity is like the negative unity of the multiplicity of men. So right there, I mean, the next line is this unity is negative in relation to men because it is transmitted to man by matter insofar as matter is non-human. So I mean, what he's saying there is like scarcity is that sort of almost like Yeah, I mean, it's just constituted in like
Scarcity
a social
creates the
on the social level.
anti-human, is what I'd put it as.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much what he also ends up saying later on, when he's talking about how, um, later on he's talking about how the human becomes non-human in conditions of scarcity when like we're sort of consuming scarce products. Yeah. And that's sort of
Yeah,
tied to like
which
perception of evil in the social field.
and I guess to like I guess what is the what do people make of that kind of bifurcation into like active and passive engine, like the active and passive dimensions of the engine of history? Like, I guess how is if scarcity is this, how is the accumulation of the inert, what was it called? It's the of the inert universal memory. Like, how are those two interacting to to drive that, right? Like, obviously, like a kind of a material sense, when I think of it, it's uh, the the inert universal memory is what makes any contingent scarcity what it is, or to put it blunt, like like right now, for example, our scarcity at the moment consists of the right. We have like energy. Well, I mean, it's which maybe is a common denominator across history, but like right now we have like whatever fossil fuels are what's scarce, like the brute kind of like concentrated energy that we use. It's that we can exploit to kind of propel this kind of growth based model of like civilizational and state management. Like we use we use these concentrated forms of energy, and they are finite in like they seem finite, at least because of like the way that uh the political dimension kind of plays with that. But like in a literal sense, they aren't finite. They're kind of or they are finite in the sense that I guess there's different levels. Like I was trying to think of like what are the like, for example, like there's actually a lot of oil that is much deeper in the crust, and part of the problems with that, obviously, like technologically it's really hard to drill the deeper you go because of increasing temperature and pressure. But if you just kind of organize like a very you just organized a large operation of just digging a very wide hole over a long period of time, you could actually go extremely deeply. That's what like digging a canal or something like that is. And or even actually, here's the kicker. It's like maybe with nuclear weapons, you can create, and the Soviets and the Americans in the 60s were exploring using nuclear weapons for drilling operations, right? And like we actually are able to drill much deeper into the crust and access probably like enormous amounts of oil and other ores, and we have the technology to do it. It's not even a technological barrier. It's a purely like political problem where we just cannot figure out how to use nuclear weapons to open up the ground without triggering kind of nuclear war between each other. Essentially, like that's what like the I guess the debates on that have been.
Right.
So
I mean, that's like a sort of thing he's getting at because you're talking about things that are kind of maybe scarce as to like how we are choosing to read those things as presently scarce for like specific needs. But I think like the larger point he's making is that under conditions of scarcity, like literally anything can be read as like a source of conflict over scarcity, even if it's in like abundance, and even if it's not actually something that you wouldn't be able to procure yourself easily. Because like in page 7 of the PDF, he's even talking about how like certain members of a society, if you don't know how many individuals there are and like what their consumptive patterns are, there could very well be enough for everyone, and you might have enough, and your neighbors and everyone might have enough, but still you're kind of presuming other members in like a collective that each one of them could want what you have. And when someone uses something up or consumes it, then it's gone. He like uses the word like annihilation later down the page. It's like basically anything that you want can be read as being scarce. So this is more like a just a general kind of feeling you feel on like how he's constructing society, no matter what the actual sort of material conditions, quote unquote, are.
I mean, to extend a point in this constellation, what I am hearing from Emmy, although correct me if I'm wrong, is an application of the meta category of scarcity. I mean, at one level, I mean, this is sort of how the progression of the of Emmy's presentation went. At one level, there is a scarcity of energy in the sense that it is a good in demand. But then there's also the sense in which scarcity applies at the level of um uh I guess political structuration, because the problem that was outlined is that the attempt to uncover to make available to the market or to consumption in general um energetic resources is held in check by the destabilization effect of attempting to do such a thing. So there's some level at which an equilibrium of scarcity is key to geopolitical order, and uh, and that the disruption of that order um, will be cognized by by invested parties as the threat of uh, the possibility of the other's violence, since at least how if I was hearing it right, the uh, massive projects for terrestrial transformation destruction to uncover to reduce energetic scarcity would be received as something like maybe not an act of war directly, but something precipitating that. So, I mean, the scarcity is operating as a meta category, and uh, there's something. I mean, as Ix said very rightly, Sartre is like, yeah, in theory history does not, we can imagine a society in which history is not in which there is no scarcity, and yet there is history. uh the dialectic does not require there to be scarcity. Scarcity is, anthropologically speaking, something like a condition of um individuation. But I think the again, if I am reading, if I am hearing it correctly, the question that comes up is, what is the difference between geopolitics and anthropology in the service of something like a theory of history? Because Sartre is kind of, I mean, the whole motivation for an inertial plane of agency is yeah, I mean, as you say, in order to inscribe on a transcendental plane all of those human actions that are typically, or that can be written off as anthropological passivity, like our relation to our environment, which is thought of in terms of scarcity, what is available, what is not available. And then, of course, that becomes an object of political self-determination, and therefore, what is inert is sort of dialectically resorbed through uh, disruptions. I mean, he says here, and ignore my schizophrenic doodling, or don't. But history is born from a sudden imbalance which disrupts all levels of society, uh, and that certain scarcities can condition a moment of history if, in the context of changes of technique, they take the form of abrupt changes in the standard of living. So there's a sense in which uh, scarcity itself is doubled. I mean, that's what it would mean to be a meta category. At one level, it is this passive inertia of our relation, our immediate relation to our environment, and then there's a kind of feedback effect of scarcity as an active inert medium that can uh, can disrupt. And I think it would be such an example of that could be something like this geopolitical situation where the possibility of excavation, which isn't I mean, is not itself identical with a political action in explicit terms. Yet it can only be felt as a political action, but it comes from a domain that is non-human. Um, this thought didn't really have a trajectory. I'm just sort of re but I wonder how that sounds to you guys. Is that did I miss the point of the oop, possibly
I mean,
useful? Yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
oh yeah, I think it made a lot of sense, but like it just seems, and maybe this is maybe part of why you chose this excerpt in the context of whatever anxiety. But it's like it kind of in some way it seems like it's just like the division itself is the between the it is the causative element here, like the between people, I guess, whatever, like that the other or this psychic division is what's actually generating this, and it is what I guess he's saying here as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Our mind should be to try to identify the place of anxiety in this. I mean, it is. We read the Freud on anxiety, Kierkegaard, Heidegger on anxiety, and then now we don't have that term is not appearing explicitly. And so I don't want to try and tackle it so directly personally, though everyone is please volunteer any thoughts. But at least, I mean, I think part of the discomfort about Sartre's method is that when I mean, as I think Ix pointed out very early on, Sartre says, history has a fearful and depressing meaning. It appears as though what unites men is an inert demonic negation, taking away their substance, that is to say, their labor, and turning it against all men in the form of active inertia and totalization by extermination. And then, I mean, I kind of read this point as well together with uh, the other one, yes, this one that especially in the context of changes of technique, which also means application of technique, uh, scarcity that can be anthropologically tolerable becomes a motivation for political transformation, political catastrophe, a sudden imbalance, a discontinuity which disrupts the stack of social strata, or at least the kind of symbiotic relations that have been developed up till that point. And I think this distinction between a passive inert and active inert um, field is it feels like it begs the question. I mean, Levi-Strauss said that the point of Sartre's critique is to ask what the conditions are in order to mythologize the French Revolution, and in order to mythologize kind of founding discontinuity of modern politics in in the historicistic sense, modern, as in that the beginning of the 19th century, in the West, that this distinction between passive and active, and it's also something, again, like X pointed out earlier, it's not something that Sartre thinks occurs to primitive social organization, or it doesn't seem like it. Maybe I'm misreading. Um, and that it requires a theoretical theorization, this difference, but in that theorization, what would be a kind of suspended state of action um, seems alighted. I mean, maybe a comparison would be clarifying. Um, I mean, people come up with all kinds of reasons in the modern age for the genesis of social disequilibrium. I mean, Emmy mentioned the Malthusians, and scarcity is a key term in that story. Um, I think all of those cases, from Hobbes, even Rousseau, Malthus, others, up to the contemporary period, Girard, maybe. Um, there is a lack of focus or attention given to the need um, of the man of science, or the one who puts themselves in that position, to give an account of uh, to kind of release themselves from the anxiety by theorizing the anthropological conditions of the catastrophe which is being prophesized. Um, and what really is the political value of that, um, of the production of that cognition? I mean, for Sartre, it is really to put history back on its horse, uh, or to put the horse of history back in the to saddle, to get back on it. And so it begins from, I mean, the notion of inertia, it is um a situation of disorientation, because we have to accept that action is not internally directed for historical objects. I mean, that's why I brought up Aristotle, since for Aristotle, inertia is not present. Every physical object has its own impulsive force, um, that's qualitatively distinguished. So no universal physical law for um, except for the very idea of self movement, and that's why Aristotle is just as much a biologist, or attempts to be a biologist, as a philosopher. But now we in this kind of Newtonian situation where inertia is the fact that needs to be folded into action writ large. Uh, Sartre is taking on, is employing, I mean, the critique of dialectic. I mean, anyone who has a different thoughts, or similar, or related. But it seems like the point of critiquing dialectic is that it cannot. I mean, for Sartre, it cannot. Dialectical rationality is too fast, and therefore cannot um, sit with the inertial dimension, the inertial field of action. And yet, the whole of Sartre's program is to activate inertia in this universal history. Um,
I think maybe one way to think about this is like the speed of like the potential dialectical relations between people that could be sort of unified and like or could like recognize itself as like the same praxis is like broken. I mean, there's like two lines that I found really telling that were kind of just like little parts of sentences that were like major points he's making, but I think like the word choice says a lot
mhm,
where like on page 10 he just has this part where like in reciprocity, my partner's praxis is, as it were, at root my praxis, which has broken in two by accident. And these two pieces, each of which is now a complete praxis on its own, both retain from their original unity a profound affinity and an immediate understanding. So I don't know if I'm reading this incorrectly, but I feel like he's like stating in a very plain way that, essentially I kind of read the entire piece as like trying to explain why don't we all just get along actually though? Like none of this would be happening if we all got along and like weren't sort of deluded into thinking that like or it wouldn't have to be the case if we didn't live in like scarcity, this sort of presumption of scarcity that, praxis could be aligned and like work for everyone. Like later on, he goes on to talk about like violence on page 12, and he's talking about this like sort of the unbearable fact of broken reciprocity. So, I mean, like I feel like the entire, what he's really saying when he's talking about, like you view yourself as other, and like the other is you, and like you are other, and things start appearing demonic and alien to you, et cetera, is like really all just to say that we could, um, well, but that's sort of re-enter, kind of redoubling of the other in yourself. You're still kind of presuming that you actually have some sort of idea of what that other is by projecting yourself onto it. So the other still must also be a human, but for some reason they're acting against you. And like that's where this broken reciprocity almost comes from. I mean, which is all to say like when he's talking about others and objects, you're projecting out what you know you're capable of and what you want to do um, into the other, and that's still, and I feel like the very fact you're doing that still kind of applies that there could be like a union or some sort of agreement that could be met because it's still something that's not, even if you understand it as alien, it's not like entirely actually alien, or else you wouldn't be able to understand it at all. So he's still kind of trying to retain that, there can be some sort of shared understanding, even if it really never really comes to pass. But like the sort of structure of object and other for him, I think like leaves that possibility always open. And I think that's what he's trying to work towards and explain why that hasn't happened yet with, the entire concept of like the practo go inert field.
mhm,
Because I think what he wants to do is like sort of activate matter to almost catch up to the speed of the dialectic and not be so slowed down.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I mean, he says that scarcity is produced by uh, well, scarcity produces social organization. It is also produced by social organization. Surplus is produced by social organization, and I mean, this the description is something like um, Angel says he can't help being dialectical. Um, yeah, something like yeah. I mean, as to just quote or to just cite what Ix just said, he's trying to. I mean, the dialectic is slowed down by its ignorance of uh, reality, and you need a this kind of existential critique of dialectic in order to bring reality up to speed with the dialectic. So it's an intensely practical program, and there is, I mean, if I could read into what X said, there is a kind of disappointment that is fueling this whole project, um, and well, I wonder if he is, I mean, to what extent this practical disappointment is overriding um, uh, social theoretical concerns or even political concerns, which is sort of that's sort of the angle that Levi-Strauss is taking on. But
Yeah.
just I mean, Emmy is my personal geopolitics expert, so I'm sure I'll if I'm getting things wrong, I can be corrected. But like, would Sartre, in what way would Sartre be able to make sense of the following situation, where and Trump is certainly not, he's not the first American uh, political agent to think in the following way, but he is the latest and greatest, and he seems to be with this whole Venezuela situation. He seems to believe that scarcity produces surplus. It's possible that this axiom, lies at the heart of the entire dynamic of our of the American geopolitical style. But at least in this situation, and I say this, that the belief or the thought that scarcity can produce surplus, because I read somewhere that Exxon said that Venezuela is uninvestable. I think that was the quote. Um, Something similar, I think, was going on with this Ukraine thing, where he was promising the mines, but the infrastructural commitment just seemed to be completely beyond the pale of the capacity of the U.S. political will or uh, kind of domestic economic capacity. But there is this almost apocalyptic wager going on, where the conditions, I mean, it's the very thing that Sartre says isn't true, that scarcity is the sufficient condition for historicity. Um, Yet there is a tendency and even a form of action uh, that um, I mean, it doesn't just betray that belief as an erroneous one, but actively tries to bring it about through historical events. So, um, I mean, the question is not just, can Sartre evaluate this? Of course he can. Of course he can say that it is reactionary or dialectically regressive, or yeah. But whether or not he can conceptualize this form of agency as in terms of maybe not a type. I mean, there are problems with typological accounts of political action, but at least as an instance or an exemplification of a modern dynamic, um, it's not clear that Sartre is able to think in those terms. And I wonder if this is related to that very first, that little bit from the Levi-Strauss review, where he says that yeah, this aboriginal who can draw in the sand the kinship structures. Sartre says it's not a theory, it's a synthetic form of knowledge. It's lived, it's a practical fact. It's almost as if his practical world is speaking through him and he's simply expressing it. That Levi-Strauss says that is as true of the professor of physics who is writing formulas on the chalkboard. I mean, I think what seems to be at stake there is whether or not self-theorization and uh, political materiality of a given social constellation can simply be the same in the sense of converge. I mean, conceptually, they don't need to be identical, but they can just be they can and indeed are in human life vertically integrated. So that I mean, Trump, in as much as it is a, I mean, now, so sorry, one more comment, and then I'll shut up and anyone please come in. But I, it's almost as if certain people on the American left are glad to see the Trump fiasco with Venezuela because it proves um, certain assumptions about motivations for political action, that it's for oil, um, that the Iraq was for oil, and of course, I would never feel too excited about dissuading from skepticism or cynicism, even in this political field, but it is almost a tail wagging the dog situation because the whole problem isn't whether or not Trump is an opportunist or whether or not he likes to be personally enriched. I mean, that is not interesting, really, or serves any explanatory value. It is uh, why he thinks that this kind of wager will buy him the political resources to take a mortgage out on his tenure. I mean, I think that is the question. And once it's put in that way, then it's not quite the same as George Bush, even if we can ultimately put them in a line of continuity. The question is how what exactly is the dynamic that is wished for by the action, whether or not it is materially feasible, and clearly that question is not obvious, and one shouldn't wish for it to be materially feasible in order to have a coherent explanation. And even more importantly, how does it reverberate across the political field? What are the options of response for other geopolitical actors? Uh, oh, good. So Amakai says, thinking of scarcity as a not having objectively, it circumscribes a field which is shared, constitutes a collective, but situated on a phenomenological level of description, um, maybe homologous to Heideggerian strategy of being in time, anxiety, death, to find in the presence of what is implied, what is the negative, which is implied by scarcity, in experience, uh, the limit that allows one to circumscribe a whole. So it has, I mean, to put it vulgarly, if as I'm reading it, scarcity, it has a kind of epistemological function, but not reducibly. And as a result, it makes a with being of concern directs attention, phenomenological attention, that's also a recording surface, which of course human beings must have, um, always only present for in each other over against all others. What is shared and binds is the present in each of the others as a possibility of not having, on account of this other, of a desired X that's as such scarce. So thank you for that. That does situate it. And phenomenology, of course, it remains for Sartre central. So that colors in the picture. nicely.
I would say the
Yeah,
difference
especially.
between Trump and George Bush might be the difference between symbolic law and obscene superego. Because obscene superego is like where people are like, "Oh, this is madness. You're crazy." You know what I'm saying? It's like pleasure's being derived or whatever. Because like I was going over like that thing like where I was like, I was just defending the humanity or whatever is what I was telling people, and I pissed off some of the native people who were like defending you know the dragons or whatever, and they were like, yeah, but the way you were talking to them, you the way you were talking, it sounds like you were having fun, like saying like, oh, they did nothing wrong, and in a sense, I was getting pleasure from being like, you know, that's just how it's got to be sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just because it's like it's so absurd because it's like part of you thinks like, well, it's a fictional world. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you don't necessarily apply like the same like I wouldn't do that for Trump or whatever. I wouldn't be like, yeah, man, they just had to go into Venezuela and whatever. But like for a fictional setting, I'm like, well, it's us or them. It's us or them. It's us or them.
Hmm.
You know?
Oh,
Yeah, though I mean that kind of obscenity is I mean as I think it's relevant because that is precisely the style that Trump deploys and is clearly I mean what would one even call it? The marketing strategy of all of these the I guess the memification of the White House although that is not I'm not completely satisfied with that description, but that clearly operates on a phenomenological level.
I think maybe one concept that might be useful to like describe any sort of specific uh, like state actor might be like in the chapter when he's talking about business and like the concept of like the milieu. Um, I mean, going back to what you were saying, of like how would Sartre read what's going on in the situation? I think he would still continue to read it as like this is a disappointment that is like entirely understandable, but he wouldn't be able to understand like the actions of Trump, for example, as like something that would be still going on if Trump had more kind of information. I mean, I think one thing I really picked up on with Sartre, and like it sort of comes up on this page 30, but I think I'll start with what like a comment Levi-Strauss makes that I thought was really instructive where was it? Actually, no, I think this is the one that I sent over to you before we
Hmm.
started. Where was it? Right, because the notes aren't syncing between my phone and my tablet. So give me one sec.
Hmm.
Right, so here, it's on page 7 of the PDF for the Levi-Strauss excerpt where he has this line, this symmetry between history and anthropology seems to be rejected by philosophers who implicitly or explicitly deny that distribution in space and succession in time afford equivalent perspectives. In their eyes, some special prestige seems to attach to the temporal dimension, as if diachrony were to establish a kind of intelligibility not merely superior to that provided by synchrony, but above all, more specifically human. So the point he's sort of making there is that we do have to take space seriously as like a real category. And at
Hmm.
least for space on Earth or space that we can kind of interact with, sure, I mean, I guess we could technically, interact with like the entire universe, but practically maybe we can limit ourselves to like the Earth. And then from there, we can limit ourselves to like what's actually around us or what is actually something that could like conceivably come into contact with us. Whereas I think for Sartre, he on this like page 30 of the PDF when he's talking about like the milieu, there's like the milieu of like a business when it's actually doing a sort of actual transaction with the customer. He uses that same term that you had brought up of like the active synthetic force, kind of what Levi-Strauss was talking about with like the family tree diagram where yeah, like there's like an actual sort of activation of relations and matter happening there, but like the milieu is there only at least like the milieu sort of self-understanding, I think is what he's getting at is like yeah, I think like he talks about it sort of it being revealed to the milieu itself in acting in that synthetic force as like this is only a thing that happens with those precise relations, but he's making the point that the milieu was actually constituted by like the alterity that could be happening later on in time that like so those relations actually define what the business is or what the customer business relationship is. So
Hmm.
later on down in the page, he says it directly, like, this totality must not be confused with a positive concrete totality with a real presence. It is not the result of the unification of a practical field. So there we have like this idea of like a real presence in like the practical field where things are sort of actually happening. And I think for him, like actually intelligible in a way that matters or should matter, if we're like disappointing humanity with our
Hmm.
actions. So then
Hmm.
he talks about, on the contrary, it's a real extrapolation of an infinite series of relations which are both identical and other insofar as everyone conditions the other by its absence. So I think what he's really getting at there is that given infinite time, eventually you will come to see like every other possibility of relation, and then things will kind of converge in identity, and we'll see that identity uh, is sort of constituted by the fact that things might look different over time, but that's only because we're conditioning everything uh, sort of by the way that we're doing things right now. Like you as a human are sort of presuming the other is going to be someone acting like you, and then you'll also sort of objectify the other as well. And you both know you're doing this to each other. And that's
Hmm.
kind of ties back into that sort of objectification kind of slows down the dialectic as we were getting at. And he thinks with like enough time, this won't be an issue.
Hmm.
Um, and if that sounds circular, I mean, I think that's also what Levi-Strauss is talking about with like the circularity of Sartre's reasoning here. But I mean, what I would say to him is that you're kind of forgetting the fact that there's space that here might also be sort of infinite at like at like the limit, but at least I think it's sort of impractical to not read space as limited, which is why I was sort of telling
Hmm.
you before when I was DMing my like reactions to the readings of like he doesn't seem to have this concept that like something can just never come in contact ever and just never occur to you like at any point. I
Hmm.
think for him, he's still holding out like in time things will I think
Hmm.
really reveal themselves to us.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
there's for me, I just read it as like, well, there's no reason why every state has to necessarily happen or like be known to you. Yeah, that's it.
What I had a question about kind of about everything, but just this general idea of a kind of convergence on identity in infinity, and how would you how are you pairing that with what Virgil was talking about earlier about the kind of this other dynamic between the dialectical and which I'm not sure I fully understood that part, but basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems to be the lag of the real, or I forget the term you were using, uh, and how that it lags behind the dialectical. And at least how I was interpreting that was just that there is kind of uh, thought and materiality. Thought, because it's kind of whatever, it occurs at the speed of of thought. The world does not occur in that sense, or when I guess, like, to put it in kind of terms that are more familiar to me, there's like the whatever the kind of a schema that you can build about how things operate will lag behind the reality of how that system can be implemented or something along those lines. But anyway, so that I guess if that could be clarified a little bit, and then pairing it with what you just said, Lex, about this kind of convergence of in infinity with identity.
Right. Let's see. I think the relevance of that idea of like things eventually converging in time is that, I mean, I would see it. I mean, I personally see things in a way that like sort of the ships can just never meet, no matter how much time is given to them. They can just things can just constantly keep missing each other, and I don't think Sartre really allows for that possibility to happen. Only because I think for him, um, we're like almost as if we can only kind of act within the whole that we are all projecting and sharing in that sort of practical field, but he's not really considering that there could just be something that is missed over time, even if you give someone like enough time to sort of experience and think through things. Like there's just certain distinctions or concepts that would just never occur unless they do. Uh,
This is
yeah,
how
I
I
don't
was.
know.
This is how I was. Yeah, both of these comments are extremely helpful. I mean, it's kind of because he has this kind of strange remark about the first moment of ethics being Gnostic, being Manichaean specifically, which is this is this form of Gnosticism that involves, like others, an absolute dualism of good and evil and a kind of war between them. It's what Augustine was before he converted to a Christian. Um, and uh, it is an interiorization, according to Sartre, of let's speak. I can just yeah. Um,
I think it was just in an interiorization of scarcity and like the breaking of reciprocity. Uh,
yeah, yeah, which is um right at the level of need, and through it scarcity is experienced and practiced through Manichaean action, and that the ethical takes the form of the destructive imperative, evil must be destroyed, and at this level too violence must be defined as a structure of human action under the sway of Manichaeanism and in the context of scarcity. Violence always presents itself as counter-violence, that is to say, as a retaliation against the violence of the other. And I bring this up just because this is the what is described as the axiomatic foundation of this dialectic of the self and the other in some sort of social constellation, in some kind of milieu, and it is also what characterizes for him the hostility that characterizes anthropological encounters of friend and um, stranger into that transforms into friend and enemy. Since I am always a threat, I always signify the possibility of scarcity, um, and I mean, even, I mean, here's one option in terms of placing anxiety, maybe in line with Amakai's comment. The meeting of the stranger uh, kind of signifies the basis of circumscription of a group through making scarcity into a common language for that group. And
right.
when one group meets another group, that kind of original constitutive moment is relived, and so hostility is the uh, hostility is the effect, and then the first moment of ethics is that whole anthropological dynamic interiorized into an individual consciousness in relation to an other in an abstract sense. But given, and this is we're coming back to the comment from the later chapter, or about the later chapter, given an infinite amount of time, there would be a sequence of exchanges between kind of ideal points in a kind of unreal social space, which involves myself and another, and all of the functions that have just been mentioned, um, where we are both kind of recognized to be the playthings of scarcity in this in its pure function, and our individuality, our contingency as historical beings are produced out of scarcity, and there is a need on the basis of kind of playing the problem of ethics out, which is both problem of violence generally, but also the problem of ethics as an internalization of social political conflict. And so ethics can kind of empty itself given enough time, and kind of every possible position could be taken up and then exteriorized.
Ethics can
Um,
disguise itself as its own sort of power.
say that one more time.
Ethics can disguise itself as its own sort of power.
Yeah, right. And that would be the problem with how, a finite amount of time where ethics becomes yeah, a form
Yeah.
of domination. Uh but and then so here to Emmy's comment about because we can certainly think of dialectical lagging in two senses. I mean, on the one hand, um, the lagging of a theoretical schema in an applicative relationship, maybe, to the reality, um, and then the lag of reality behind idealization. So kind of going in different directions, a lag going in different directions. And I mean, I think both, I mean, again, in this kind of fictional infinite sequence, you have both. I mean, you have a reconciliation in some sense of both, because ethics requires schematizing the reality, kind of interiorizing it, and then uh, kind of projecting it back out with the hope that it will form some kind of ordering principle. But reality, of course, is in excess of that desire. And then, uh, but precisely because it is in excess, it is, in a kind of inverted world, it is recognized to be lagging behind the process of idealization. And this kind of disjunction could, yeah, given a sufficient amount of time, find some sort of can fit together, unless, and to go back to X's point, unless there is a something like an absolute um, valuation of spatiality, in the sense that no matter how much time you have to play out ethical internalizations and political externalizations of vicissitudes of historicity between the self and the other, if it's occurring in a bounded space, you may, I mean, even Spinoza had this point that you can have an infinity uh, infinity within a bounded space. I mean, that's not only Spinoza. That's kind of the hysterical issue of Western philosophy in general. You have a bounded space, but you can have an infinite sequence within a bounded space, and um, there doesn't seem to be a way until someone like Cantor, where that infinity could be characterized as a more or less compared to another bounded space in which there would be another
Hmm.
infinity.
Right.
Um, so, how do you how and this is and but this is again the problem of action, um, given some of the examples we were thinking about. Uh, so yes, I don't know if that helps but those are the thoughts that came to mind.
Right. I think with when you were talking about like yourself sort of encountering a stranger, and then sort would say like you would immediately sort of understand that human stranger as like an enemy. That's starting still with like a concept of, man, I guess I would say the subject, but I mean, Levi-Strauss talks on like a third page, like he who begins by steeping himself in the allegedly self-evident truths of introspection never emerges from them. And then he like later goes on to talk about, he believes like Sartre sort of caught up in the snare of personal identity and like Descartes' uh, cogito. And I think that is very instructive, only insofar as yeah, we're like proceeding from understanding ourselves and then presuming that all the others can be sort of reached and understood only through like self analysis and self understanding and then projecting that out. Um, so again, he's talking about how like each subject's group and period now take the place of timeless consciousness. Moreover, for Sartre's view of the world and man has the narrowness which has been traditionally credited to closed societies. So yeah, I mean, I think what he's getting at here is that really, I mean, really, sorry, it's what I've already said of
Mhm.
how there like Sartre really isn't he isn't open to almost like openness or like complete and utter surprise from like what another person is going to do or think. Um, I think this might be maybe like one small example is like in that chapter on the radio, he's talking about the sort of
Mhm.
positions you take as a listener to how you think other people are listening to the radio program. So, there's like you kind of coming up with like refutations to the ideas being presented, or like indignation that you're listening to this and like that, this is sort of being broadcast at all, sort of a total refusal of like nonsense about like how could this have any sway on anyone. And the third position is kind of listening and trying to understand yourself as someone who would be convinced and understand that like and kind of yeah, I mean those like the three positions he's talking about, like refutation, indignation, or kind of going along with it. And I think what did I written down? Like temptation, the kind of temptation by the argument. Um,
Hmm.
like even here we have an example of, you know, you can understand how other people are going to react to something by kind of putting on their putting on their hat or putting on their mask or something. But and I think it's kind of instructive of how he thinks people work at all. Like
Mhm.
we are all, and he thinks everyone is doing this, so this is like the only way things are happening. Um, that we're all kind of presuming the other's position from our own, kind of thinking how would he act, how would he think, what would he fall for, what would he refute. He also has this concept of like the feeling you get listening to something. So someone is like broadcasting to like a million individuals, and like you as an individual, when you're thinking about how would I counter this argument, it's not that you would also put on your program to a million people as well, because
Mhm.
you don't know who the actual group is that's listening. So what you would have to do is go to each person one by one and explain to them your own feelings on the broadcast. And
Mhm.
I mean, I think he's like completely right in saying that. And I think Levi-Strauss might also agree because the point he makes is that Sartre has a lot of good like sort of practical understandings of maybe perhaps like how the economic system is working or how like the mass media system is working, but only as someone who's participating in that culture. Um, because, I sort of think that idea of you would have to go to each person to convince them or sort of putting on a hat is like something that's already inscribed in like how we communicate about these things and how we're sort of taught to think about them, but it's not like an actual theoretical, like absolute sort of way you'd have to react to something.
Well,
Um,
that's the
yeah,
function of the avatar in terms of our shared virtual existence. I mean, you
right,
don't you can bypass the infinite progression uh, of having to tell everyone how to review the broadcast by simply taking on a mask,
right, yep.
which in principle anyone could take on because it's not really you. I mean, I think of
Yeah,
Sartre's position or kind of where he's pushing as being I mean to be extremely vulgar about it, we can there are people who say that the sociality of on the internet is illusory in some kind of uh, uh, or is impotent even in an imaginary sense, um, which does not prohibit anyone from engaging in. In fact, the assertion of its illusory character is, for many who make that assertion, the condition of authentic engagement in it.
right.
And then and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
there
yeah.
and then there are those who typically those who have grown up using the internet um, and engaging in social interaction on it, where the uh, what is called illusory sociality is recognized to be the essence of sociality writ large, which is of an exchange of illusions, this kind of reverse movement. It's not, someone who is just lying to themselves will say, if I express displeasure or disinterest in some broadcast, using that word in a very general sense, something that is cast broadly out, some form of media, mass media, which every media is massified, um, that I don't like it, and I'm told, well, you try it, you do something better. Doesn't really mean anything, since I am already offering an alternative by the performance of a reversed reception compared to my partner in
Yeah,
dialogue.
yeah. I completely agree. And that's why like the one line I had highlighted, it was on page like 22 when he's talking about the radio. Like he has this line where it's like, for someone who like goes up to the radio and turns it off because he doesn't like it. Like he
Hmm.
says, for this purely individual activity changes absolutely nothing in the real work of this voice. And I just thought that was like the I liked the entire chapter on a whole, but that was the one thing that I thought he got very wrong because yeah, I mean in terms of like a very broad scale, if there's like a million listeners and you're like kick yourself out, that's like minus one. Um sure, it's not a massive change, but to say like it changes absolutely nothing, I think is just completely false because like the real work the voice is doing is that it's being listened to by people. I mean, he says like, we're sort of subject to the human work of the voice. And I think, if you yourself take yourself out of that situation, then something did actually change. Which I think for him that would just kind of be read as too like individualistic or something maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
think what you say, especially in the conditions of social media, that yeah, the sort of performance of a refusal, I
Yeah,
think
you're trying to do the ethics of
does
the
change
cut
something.
here. You're trying to say, oh, if I stop the loop or whatever, there's there's good that can come from that, which, is not wrong necessarily. But I feel like that's almost like a Lacanian idealist view of how we uh view transference, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess like one general position that I'm very amenable to like sort of changing my position on, but at least that's how I think see things now is like there's really no possible way to like uh out quantify these sorts of things, so it really shouldn't even be a consideration in the first place. Like but that's like a whole other tangent. Um, but at least for me, like I would see it as like a meaningful action to turn
Yeah,
off
you choose the things you
TV.
give yourself attention to. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's wrong either, but it's like I get I get what you're saying, and I agree with you in a way because it's like, you know, we can only give ourselves that's the thing, is like there's so much stuff to pay attention to these days. So
Yep.
whenever you do actually say turn off the radio, you are making like a choice to commit yourself to something else too. But it's like, you know what I mean? I get what you mean.
Yeah. No, I totally get what you mean. It's just that for me, like the categories of like political or social responsibility, I think are a little bit myopic and narrow. Maybe in the same way that Sartre is kind of projecting like a sameness between all people to kind of understand yourself and be like that's just like individual or something like that. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is like we kind of think that mass phenomenon need like a mass reaction to them in quantity, but I think if you kind of get stuck thinking in those terms, it just leaves other things out. And I'm just somebody who's very interested in like random surprise and random mutation and chance. Um, but that, yeah,
I thought of something maybe somewhat silly, but a schematization that could be helpful. I mean, we had that threefold of refutation, indignation, and temptation that X outlined. And if I'm just thinking of forms of refusal in forms of parasocial refusal, we have uh, logging off as refutation, which
right.
is like turning the radio, to the next channel. Indignation, which is the declaration of an exit. I'm going off Twitter. I announce to the group.
I'm quitting this hell site.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. And then temptation. I mean, does anyone have any guesses? I can only think of one other kind of refusal, but maybe I'm missing something.
I mean, I guess temptation would be like schizo posting or just going all in. Being like, you know what, I will take this on and kind of try and see what can happen if I do that.
Well, I think that would be the other side of what I imagined, which was blocking. Because
Hmm.
blocking is, I mean, it certainly is. It's the thing that has seemingly the most pointlessness along the lines that Steve was describing, because I mean it just begs to be read in a psychological way. And of course there's this compulsion that people feel to make it known when I've been blocked, like that I've been, even as a proof of something, of what exactly, it's unclear. But
I must be speaking a powerful truth if I am being
exactly.
blocked. I must be speaking.
That's the schizophrenic moment.
Yeah.
Um, as X was saying, but it's the other side. It's the negative side, you know. Uh, but it's a temptation because it's like, well, why did I need to block them? Because if I didn't, then I would be seduced into that circuit. It's a self-restriction than anything, right? I mean, maybe this is just my intuitive thought.
No, I've had people, I think, do that before to me, where it's like, they're like, they can't follow my thought necessarily, but they think I'm angry. I'm not angry, but they'll be like, I don't even know what he's talking about. We're just going to block that guy and whatever. And it's like, you know,
I mean,
I get it.
there has to be a seduction involved if I need to, because no one. I mean, just to be again be very vulgarly psychological. There's nothing that's forcing you to uh to pay attention. I mean, you could log off. You could. I mean, that's a refutation, right? Log off, or you could become exhausted with the whole thing. Declaration of exit. But blocking is participation in the flow, in the circuit. But you're slowing yourself down. It's an inhibition of some kind.
I think for the most part, you're
Acceleration,
right.
in a way, a break from certain uh, stimuli that might, whatever, steer you in a way that, you just don't find productive.
Hmm.
I mean, I get it. I don't like, whenever I get blocked, I'm not like, oh, or sometimes I'm like, oh, I was seeking the truth or whatever. But I mean, I don't get blocked that often either, but it's like, I don't see that as like a thing to be proud of necessarily either. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, they're like people who are like, oh man, I must be seeking. And sometimes I'm like that, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, no, this is just me being myself. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Was it Amakai? Did you
Yeah,
have it,
I
or
was
was?
going to say that I'm with you almost 100%, except that it has the general like hydraulic economic function of controlling the frustration of impotence, exactly of the kind that Sartre is talking about, so that you might like pull the trigger where you feel the temptation and the need to delimit yourself, but on again, economically speaking, it's a quantity that wants to you know to be acted on, to be released.
Hmm. Like the site, the locus of the block is something that asks to be expressed.
Well, it's one, it's one decisive action that you can take within the rules of the game, right?
Hmm.
Like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna actually look at the address of the guy and like slap them? I mean, that's always a possibility, but that would be insane. I mean, insaner.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, it is the most proximate. I mean,
Yes.
it's the most near to the locus of the disturbance.
Hmm. And in that sense, you're saying, you know what? Like, I don't need to do more than the minimum to ward you off. So that it's not like I wouldn't exaggerate the in response to what you said, that people feel the need to flaunt being blocked, but really it's like swatting a fly. Like, the quantity needs to be there. The quantity is not like swatting a fly. You really do want to like act out on impotence, but the both the nullity and the ease of doing it certainly doesn't like make it into any kind of event. It's just some sort of thumbnail of decisive action.
Yes, right. Well, I mean, I'll again not because one does. I mean, this is As X said, one of the questionable things that comes up in the Sartre is this notion of univocal interiority, which is an obvious assumption of the social media, so-called. Uh, that we all, by virtue of the univocal rules of the game, we all at least, I mean, we may not have, obviously, we don't have all the same feelings. We don't all have the same symbolic position. In fact, the symbolic position is diversified to the max, or that's the belief. Um, but in terms of our interiority, it is univocal precisely because it can be expressed in terms of these formalizations of action.
These proximate
Um,
options. Yeah.
yeah, and um, but not to generalize my own personal experience precisely for those reasons that all is illusory in some fundamental sense. I have a very hard time blocking people. Not again, not out of principles. Although I could if I wanted to, I could furnish them. I could maybe along Sartrean lines, as X was saying. I mean, why slow the circuit down? Why refuse when we can just unless there's an imminent danger of some kind, uh, which is always itself imaginary, even if it could become real. But I think if I could just auto interpret with all of the problems that brings along, um, I mean, I feel like if I block someone, I become culpable for making up for the lost, for putting something in the place that I have crossed out, for lack of better words. So that feels like a counter impulse, to me at least. Like it's not, so it wouldn't be a minimal action, or it wouldn't be a minimal amount of energy expended, because it would require some kind of replacement.
Hmm.
How so? What do you mean require replacement?
I
In
mean,
what sense?
if I am uh well, I can't really imagine a situation. I mean, the only people I block are the sex bots, really. Um, or that I mean, I think I've had the experience of blocking someone who just won't. Yeah, no, I don't think. But I guess if I were to imagine myself in a situation where, I mean, um, the most realistic situation would be, uh, maybe someone who just I'm having some sort of exchange with online, and it just won't stop, and then I don't want to continue for whatever reason. Um, Blocking feels, one, like an admission of defeat, I guess, first of all,
Oh,
like
right, right. And that's
like
something like
that.
everyone says.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, not only an admission of defeat in that more could always be said in place of blocking, but that if I do block, then I will have to generate a positive synthesis to, you know, because so it wouldn't just, I mean, it would feel cowardly if I wouldn't, I mean, not it doesn't even have to be advertised, but just for my own sake to not have it linger as a missing place.
so
Um,
you're thinking of blocking as an act in a conversation, or like having been addressed already, or
I guess, yeah, yeah, basically, yeah.
oh, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, we all have like our own, uh, we just think about it in the terms we think about it, and that's how we start thinking. That's how we start speaking, and then we realize we're talking about not exactly the same thing, because for anyone who's listening to it, it's probably different. But I always block only. I mean, I'm completely with you on conversations. I would always only block either completely a third party as like marking myself that this is not a conversation I would get into, or I mark when I have I block when I have the temptation to get into a conversation.
Mhm.
And instead of commenting, instead of getting into a conversation that would be whether it would make me feel stupid, basically, I
Mhm.
block.
Hmm.
So I block a lot because I don't want to get into all the conversations that I don't want to
Mhm.
get into.
I mean, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
is consistent with how it's because even in the case where I feel like it is a like I could go on if say some hypothetical individual who I'm having a interminable exchange with that feels like it's going nowhere, but they feel the need to keep going. I could also keep going, or I could stop myself. But there's no neutral position. There's no neutral option. So there's always the temptation function is associated with the block because it is like, yeah,
Yeah.
like, you know, that's
You
enough.
know, I guess you walk back into the answer. So I guess the temptation for me would be always the temptation of like speaking in anger and having something idiotic out there, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
Anyway, so that's completely anecdotal, apparently.
X, were you going to say something?
Oh no, some. Oh wait, I'm getting a phone call. Give me one second.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think of the options that are available in the games so called as being yeah, grammatical because I mean my consciousness is not localized. I mean, to say something very obvious but maybe that useful, my consciousness is not localized in the avatar that I identified with on social media.
Mhm.
My consciousness is the flow of um is the semiotic flow, and you need an ability to, I mean, all of the options, the liking, the marking, the bookmarking, the blocking, the reposting, whatever, are all kinds of punctuation. So we are just de facto in the position of analysis of the analyst because we are marking things off, and the possibility of speaking is actually not an a priori necessity of engagement, which is of course why there
Mhm.
can be so many people who don't um
Look.
put words, yeah, who lurk.
Right, yeah. I
um
wanted to say on blocking. So if I understand like the way you're kind of reading it, it's like when you block someone, you're kind of putting like a capstone to your like relation with that person or avatar in a way that it becomes this positive thing that won't be open to like change or like alterity. And then
yeah,
that can kind of that's something you can like reflect on, or it can like haunt you or have some sort of like after effect, almost in like a positive way. Whereas if you don't block, there's no like final determination that happens that could kind of lead to questioning as to whether like that final determination should I was gonna say like was the right one, but I think really it's more like should that final determination exist at all? Uh,
exactly, yeah,
Whereas for me, yeah, I used to be someone who like didn't really block very often or mute very often because when I was using Twitter in that mode, it was like well, I'm kind of here to see all that's happening on social media. I don't want to be out of some sort of conversation or like be blocking myself from some kind of understanding of like a trend or like a main character, like the main movers and shakers in like certain parts of the social graph back when like Twitter used to actually have a social graph and wasn't just like Instagram for you page slop as they
Mhm.
changed this year, which well, whatever. But I mean, now I mean I block and mute very I want to say very liberally, but liberally enough to where if it kind of feels as if the word someone is saying is something that I can never really or if I kind of get the sense that like someone's written themselves off and like is entirely only acting as an avatar, that becomes very uninteresting to me, and I just decide and
Mm.
it's and they're an avatar in such a way that's like displeasing to me, something that I
Mhm.
find like disagreeable or
Mm.
disgusting or annoying or like overly kitsch and cliche, then I just sort of block and move on.
Mm. So
Even
more of
though now
like a
though,
curational function.
Hmm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That and just to like lower my blood pressure when I'm scrolling. Which yeah, that's also just curation. Because for me, I guess I kind of reached a
But
point
in that
where
if for that reason it
yeah,
is somewhat related if it is a kind of depressurization.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
mhm.
But go on.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because I just had like the image pop in my head of like a tweet that was coming up earlier. There's been some discourse in like the VTubing community, I think, which I'm not very much into VTubers. I do
Mhm.
like them in concept, but I don't like streaming because it's just a massive time sink. That's really the main issue that I have with like streaming and following streamers. But anyways, there was this argument happening. Someone had drawn some art of like a guy sitting in front of his like computer monitor, and on it is just like a pink anime girl, and like the guy's like smiling. And it's like 2016, and then 2026 on the right is like that same setup, but behind the pink cute anime character is like a normal person. And like the speech bubbles are like an airplane, someone holding hands with someone else, and like a house. So the kind of contention there is that VTubing has kind of shifted into just being like a not even like a mask or an avatar, but just like literally just a different mode of visual presentation for normal just chatting streaming for people for like I guess the insinuation there with like those three speed bubbles is like quote unquote normies. you know.
Like a disenchantment has occurred?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a disenchantment, not on behalf I mean people were kind of positing it as like, oh, this is like a disenchantment on the side of like the observer, like the watcher, the audience member. But for me it was very obvious that like the point they were making is that the actor is no longer staging an illusion.
For them. They
And
don't believe in their own performance, is what you're saying.
yeah, like they're not providing an illusion or fantasy,
Hmm.
in a way that I think like prior forms of VTubing were very much about like you're literally playing an anime character come to
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
Whereas now it's more just like an anime, almost like profile picture over just like a normal person who might have like some quirks or different identities and such. I don't know why I brought this up. Wait, what was I talking about before? Right. So I was talking about how I sort of dislike when I can tell someone is acting entirely as an avatar for something I find distasteful on social media and then I block. Whereas, I mean, I'm like very, very, very enamored and interested in that sort of total staging of like an illusory avatar in the context of anime and fantasy and the kind of like the semiotics that it plays with. And then I was kind of just wondering to myself, like, yeah, I mean, really, the difference there is just like the framing device. Like one I'm willing to go along with, and I find enjoyable and pleasurable and interesting, and the other is like annoying and stupid and like disgusting. But yeah, that's it.
But what's the difference? So the case of the someone, so I guess some random person expressing a feeling of loss or of entropy, some kind of theatrical entropy in the VTubers,
Mm.
like that comparison as an expression of, I mean, maybe disappointment is too strong, but some kind of some kind of some loss, some kind of scarcity, that is not enraging. That's even if it's an acting out of some kind, that is something that does draw your interest. Am I reading that correctly? Or is that someone that you not want to see on the?
In terms of someone like sort of sharing their displeasure, like the shift in the past 10 years.
Yeah, like
Um,
was that an example of something
oh,
you like to
oh no,
see?
that's something that not that I like or dislike. That's just something I'm like under I can understand and empathize
Uh-huh. But
with.
you're not blocking that person who.
No, 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 no,
Uh-huh.
no. I was bringing that up in context of like when I'm blocking like I don't know Anna Katian or some like racist based right wing account or whatever. Like those are
Mhm.
like avatars that I really dislike. But that isn't because I like sort of prize like authenticity or something like that. Um, it's just like a simple comparison of like there's like inauthentic avatars that I dislike, but there are inauthentic avatars that I do like. So like
Mhm.
authenticity or like truth is not what determines if I like something or not. That's it. That's really all I'm saying.
Mhm. Right. I mean, I think that is that actually, I mean, that clearly can be generalized. And whatever people mean by relatability, it's certainly not, it doesn't, it's never to be taken at face value.
Right.
I mean, I had, maybe um, this middle section about the radio broadcast, the indirect gathering, this dialectical seriality
Hmm.
is, I mean, it feels the beginning of this whole conversation was kind of reflection on um, immersion, kind of two forms of immersion, kind of imaginary immersion into the parasocial medium as a collective illusion, in which case the problem of scarcity is just kind of uh, dissolved, I guess, in the assumption that one is partaking in some kind of I mean something between being a child at a playground and being an audience at a in front of a play. Not quite either two of them distinctly. And then immersion in the parasocial medium as a kind of um modal play between authenticity and inauthenticity without, I mean, as pure operations, with the goal being, yeah, something like uh search for um clarity, I guess, even a kind of Cartesian point of view.
Hmm.
Um and it's the latter case that is more, I mean, it's more in touch um with the practical reality, which is why I identify that with the Sartrean mode. But even Sartre, I mean, but this is the kind of equivocal nature of his program, that he wants to immerse himself so thoroughly into this kind of inertial level that it can never really become um, uh, it can never really become an object in the full sense. I mean, he had the language of objectivity is always there in this dialectic of the self and the other, and being an object as a signifier of scarcity, or being a signifier of certain foundational moments in the dialectic that are have the effect of displacement or suddenness. I mean, all kinds of existential categories that I mean, he maybe not ripping off from Heidegger, but I mean something along those lines, appropriating or um, uh, and the direction Sartre is going is um a bit of a spoiler is that in the first kind of 30 so or 40 pages of the Lacan seminar, he's talking about Heidegger and Sartre, and there's a kind of bifurcated um there's a fork between care and then what he's calling seriousness, which is coming out of reading Sartre, maybe a different portion of this uh of the critique, Sartre's critique, maybe something else, but kind of two a fork where Heidegger is going kind of towards the um, care as a circumscription of anxiety and uh, seriousness as a I mean circumvention of anxiety. I mean they're both kind of forms of sublimation, I guess, in a vulgar psychoanalytic sense. But Sartrean seriousness is a kind of impulsion to confront what is being left behind by the dialectic, and then to go back to it and to kind of pull it up. Um,
Right. I think that actually explains one line that stood out to me also in that chapter on the radio, where he was
mhm,
like distinguishing between like what he called the behaviors of alterity versus uh like those can be occasioned in like the immediate versus he like contrasts that to and like that behavior or like behavior happening in like immediacy is like contrasted to praxis, which I think what do they call it? Um by this, I mean that it has neither the immediate structure of an individual practice nor the concerted structure of a common organized practice. All right, so there can be like an immediate structure to individual practice there. But it is occasioned immediately as the individual's free reaction, but he cannot produce it under the influence of the collective, except insofar as it is itself a lateral totalization of seriality. Uh, yeah, so the way
mhm.
I was kind of reading that, seriousness is like a really good word to put it because I think in so many words, what he's saying is like, your individual reaction in your room to the radio broadcast is like something that is entirely like unmoored and free and doesn't really have any sort of um effect that it leaves behind.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh, and that is like yeah, I guess it's just unserious. I was just like, I just really want to get more into if anyone had any idea of like what he's saying when he's talking about like a lateral totalization of seriality. Like he's saying like um, the collective understood in like the mode of, uh, yeah, I'm just not totally, I feel like I kind of get it, but I just kind of wanted to know what other people made of that passage if you had gotten to that second chapter.
I mean, so anyone feel free to interrupt. Um, the practico inert is again, I mean, it appears to be this inert medium of praxis from which more kind of complex, more self-directed group formation can occur. That the kind of last bit I attached was on the fused group, which is not the same as this dialectical seriality, but the latter kind of emerges from the former, uh, and um, it seems like it's a lateral relation because they only, I mean, it's not there's no formal organization, there's no I guess what we would call very loosely hierarchical organization, it is a kind of purely adjunctive relation. We're just side by side as we're listening to the radio broadcast. In a logical sense, I mean, we may be all around the world, but we as listeners, we're just kind of horizontally related.
Mhm.
And
Okay, right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and of course, however, in order to relate to those with whom I have the most logically proximate relationship, I do need to take this detour through the point of the other, the point from whom the broadcast is coming. Um, and uh, there was some study when I was looking at it more in detail about, all of which are all to be taken in with a large grain of salt. All this research, psychological and marketing research on influencers, parasocial interaction, blah blah blah, where um, they were kind of just trying to extract data from streaming, Twitch streaming or other sites of streaming, and trying to measure like what type of interaction was happening most. Was it persona and audience interactions or lateral interactions? And it was the latter, as in it was on the whatever the from the data that they were using. Um, there was much more on live streams in chats, say there was much more uh audience member to audience member interaction than um vertical interaction, uh as opposed to, say, non-live forms of social media, like, I don't know, YouTube comments or something, where uh you kind of have members who are in a serial relation to each other, who are leaving comments in response to the video, quote unquote, or response to whatever is the content that's been provided from the top down. But there's something about the live stream context that enables a kind of activation of this, and what otherwise would be an inert seriality, this kind of indefinite seriality. um since they're not coming together in order to interact with each other. You would assume they're coming together in order to watch the live stream, but the live stream provides some sort of incentive, which I imagine is an uncanny experience, where the one who has the prerogative of being the object of attention basically becomes a traffic um, director. I mean,
That
that's.
is exactly how I experienced Twitch. The reason I'm talking about like VTubers being like, I can't get into streaming because it's too much of a time sink is because during that first year of COVID, I was heavy on Twitch. And there was
Mhm,
like one streamer in particular I would spend like 4 or 5 hours a day watching. And you're entirely right, where like a lot of the time I spent in chat, and this is like a smaller streamer as well, so that might change the dynamics as well. But like,
mhm,
yeah, it literally was just an occasion to gather with other people
mhm,
in the chat, interact with each other as we're reacting to the stream, and then the streamer interacting with us, and
mhm.
picking up on our conversations and joining in and all of that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it really was. But when I think about it, it's like it was sort of different than perhaps using something like Twitter because all the faces in chat weren't so much like individuals I was placing out and building relationships with. There's kind of just like more content to chat with and react to
Mhm,
almost.
mhm.
Um, yeah.
That is kind of my experience of group chats on Twitter. Um, I mean, there's a kind of speed there's something about the pace that is also an operation in the formation of the group, if it is to be considered a group, which obviously on most sociological criteria it's questionable.
Hmm.
This seriality.
We can generalize and say that each of these media has its own temporality.
Mhm.
Yep.
Uh, and it allows me to zoom out and say that uh, if we can stretch what Sartre is saying about the radio broadcast to our media that we hang out in every day, it also goes back at least to the Platonic preoccupation with writing. Uh,
Hmm.
if not with also the other formalizations of speech really as such. Even the speech of the rhetorician or the performance on stage or the actor who or the rhapsode, each of these
Mhm.
already formed these exactly that kind of relationship that Sartre is uh, talking about with the radio broadcast. Obviously, the question of the presence of the others, you can always refute with a punch. That's different. But that's also a question of temporality because each of these media also allows for a certain response and regrouping and active uh, vector for response. It's not only impotence and isolation.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, so with this caveat uh, of the diverging temporalities, I think this is just like we can generalize this as something like being in the book,
Mhm.
as opposed to being in the polis.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I once had it was my last chance or my last opportunity to design a class philosophy thing for college students in a classroom context, and it was a sequence of theorizations of the parasocial, and the first thing that I had them read was the Phaedrus.
Hmm.
Um, since it does involve this kind of feigning of spectatorship, since in it's Phaedrus, but who is reciting a speech from what is it?
Yes, from Lysis, yes,
Lysis, yeah,
or whatever it is. Yes.
about how um uh uh what is it that a lover is
Yes, it's better for to give in to a lover who doesn't love you than to one who does,
right, right.
or pursuer. Yes, who
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah, it's better yeah, yeah, exactly. But then of course the artifact that he's citing is the seduction, and this is that's where Socrates leads him to. It is the form of
Mhm.
seduction through this through an alienation that he becomes entangled in the problem of speaking and writing.
Yes,
Um, but it gets and then so the students are often like um, uh, I don't agree because if someone who loves you is supposed to be someone who cares about you, who has your best interests in mind, um, who you can relate to, maybe you identify with them. And so my sadistic method is basically to extract the forms of their idealization and just map them onto the kind of parasocial attachments that they, as children interacting with an adult, quote unquote,
hmm,
programmed to feign disgust at, and I just kind of do it over and over again until it becomes, you know, non-believable rather. And then at that point, hopefully, we can get somewhere. And uh, all of this is related to my interest in searching for a term, a category, more than a term maybe, that can serve. And so this is related very much, in joined with Sartre's program here, a category of negation, a schematization of the negative that can serve as I can serve the mediating function for this kind of group formation, which together with Sartre we have to sort of not actually just typologize it, but anchor it in the inertial field of sociality, because the academic psychological research on parasociality, or the research, the body of research that has generated that term, or propagated it rather,
Mhm.
by its own admission, has a very difficult time uh, measuring by its methods negative parasocial interaction, since
Mm.
in all of the I mean,
Of it?
you can.
So you're only counting
That
impressions
that
of
that
all of.
surprises me because, like, I mean, maybe it's just because of the creators I follow or whatever, but man, nothing, nothing makes I parasocial haters, man, they stick to the creator. Like, your haters will be your fans for life in a way, is what
Well,
I'd say. You know what I mean? It's like
well, I think that's the
the
practical. Yeah, sorry, go on.
yeah, it's just like, and I mean, I'm not saying that's good or whatever, but I'm just saying it's crazy how invested these people can get. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, I think that is the practical reality, which is just obvious to anyone who's in the medium, and also relevant to Sartre's centering of this problem of scarcity. But the reason why it's difficult for the academic psychologists in the contemporary period to measure it or even think about it in any way is because the surveys that they give, I mean, they experiment runs, they find, I don't know, 100, 200 people, they put them in front of some YouTuber or whoever, streamer that they watch, and then they ask them questions after they finish, like, um, uh, do you identify with the values of the persona? Uh, are you attracted? Are you physically aroused by the persona? Could you see yourself being their friend? And so on and so on. And then when it gets to, questions about negative relationships, it can only be registered in the form of disinterest, of withdrawal, since psychological positivity is basically cathexis in terms of identification or kind of imaginary situations of proximity. You like it. If you like it, that's because you could see yourself in that position. Completely ignorant of the kind of um, dynamics that we have been describing for the last couple hours. Um, but uh, on the other hand, the language that they're using of relatability, identification, um, are all common currency in on social media, but it has a completely provisional value. Um, and so what these academic psychologists, whenever they get to negative interaction, it's always, like, I didn't identify with the persona. I don't share the values of the persona. I couldn't see myself being their friend. So it's all a form of withdrawal and disinvestment, and therefore the only conclusion that you could come to as the psychologist here is that if you don't like it, then you won't become attached to it. This of the students, when I went over this with the college students, I mean, they some of them didn't allow themselves to be deluded by their own ideological environment, and made the correct point that if we say that someone is obsessed with a K-pop idol or whatever, surely we want to say that it is negative, but it's a form of negativity that takes the form of an obsession that they, and then of course psychology can come in with all the relevant sorts of functional behaviorist concepts, like, if you're obsessed with a K-pop idol, then you aren't attending to your family, you aren't attending to what really matters. um but all of that is just mm, kind of ad hoc moral normativity that has nothing to do with an analysis of the dynamic that is at hand. So I think actually the marketing research on the parasocial, on the influencer stuff is probably more practically, more theoretically valuable for its strict practical concern, whereas the academic psychology is just completely inundated by its hallucinations of positivity um, and normativity, that it does not know how to tell up from down, and it just hides this problem from itself with the statistical modeling. Because you can dream up. I mean, in 2008 to 2010, one kind of like in the literature, a standout piece of research has three or so scales um, for the statistical modeling. There's like kind of physical responses, like, are you laughing? Are you wincing in pain? Are you as you're watching the persona? There's like what I was sort of mentioning, kind of valuative or cognitive uh, scale of response, stimuli response. Like, I judge them to be a good person, or I judge them to be someone who I would want to be friends with, or whatever. And then there's some other one. So, it can produce, the institution of academic psychology can just produce interminable um, finite sets of categorization, to just drown out the reality of the phenomena. But so no one really knows what to do with what people who are on the internet are completely have no illusions about, which is that negativity binds. It's a form. It
Yes.
is at the
Yes.
center of
Yes.
group formation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. I mean,
Like,
I think this is like, and then you have like, I don't know, like this is like, uh, but radical studies or whatever, which is another like ridiculous thing or whatever. But it's like, I feel like there's like, I don't know why that hasn't crossed up with more like of the parapsychology thing, because it's like, like how do these like whatever these radical groups or whatever form? It's obviously from like, exposure to, things they find unpleasant. Or, no.
oh, you're talking about like radicalization, like over the internet or something.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's all. Oh, very overlapping with these disciplines.
some of these approaches are so like obviously flagrantly wrong-headed and obfuscatory that you have to like think about them as a sort of great potlatch of attention, you know, just like squandering away of like concentration on like absolute obfuscatory bullshit in one way or another. Like I no one enjoys the fruits of these things. I that I see.
Well, it
Uh,
might be because you have to have like a long. I almost feel like I mean, you just watch like whatever, like, any content creator you make or whatever. You watch them at the beginning, you're like, yeah, woohoo, good for you or whatever. But eventually they get bigger and then people get madder because it's like, I'm not in a special group anymore. So it's like, honestly, like, it's got to be like something you track over time because that's how the resentment builds or whatever, in my opinion. Nothing builds more resentment than seeing someone have success.
Yeah, I mean, at the academic level, you'd think isn't the purpose of the institution of university to not take things at face value and inquire into the structures of expression or um, non-identity and the exigencies of sociality in which the university is always immersed, but removes itself from as a privilege through appeal to science. But in reality, this what it develops. I mean, you mentioned the Kahneman stuff, which is kind of at the superstructure or at the base level of ideological development, at least for modern psychology. Um, I mean, it is, as I said, I think all of these categories, all of these positive categories that it uses that feel, from our point of view, so um, ridiculous and irrelevant are in the immediate interaction that we observe on the internet, say, of the kind of dynamic that is actually a question, which isn't restricted to our local observation, but obviously we feel, I mean, a scientific approach means that the phenomena that you observe, its properties are not exhausted by the observation because you don't know what nexus is required in order for that expression to occur. So obviously you want to direct your attention to theorizing what that would be or a methodological approach to what that would be, which of course, yeah, modern psychology and what is essentially just a revival of behaviorism simply refuses to do because it says, well, this is psychology, and that what makes it into a scientific approach for us is the fact that we aren't adopting a scientific approach, and that is what makes it scientific. Um, that all of relatability and I guess all variations of psychological identification are deployed. I mean, versions of it are deployed in a much more vulgar way among the participants in the parasocial interaction.
Empirical sociality
Yeah, I
or
mean,
sociology
mhm.
is, yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's it's how people I mean, in this purely pragmatic way, how it is expressed, how it is imminently theorized in the language of a common sense of some kind. But of course, in what we observe of it, it is immediately it subverts itself because when I say I relate to, thank you so much. Ex persona for all of the work that you do. This helped me out of my depression and suicidal trajectory. That when I saw your video about uh, alpha males, I was de-radicalized. Or, I mean, we already know what a call for help is, but the task is to um, acknowledge that uh, expression in this circuit, in this flow of information. It's a part of the system, and the fact that it generates some kind of imaginary discomfort at the lateral level between other people, other quote unquote normal adherents. Um, to this parasocial attachment is part and parcel of the dynamic. So immediately when someone invokes variations of identification, um, the it immediately becomes antisocial, which of course, but that is not registered by in the academic scale of analysis. It's just taken for granted. So it just yeah, it's truly uh but I guess my feeling is that it should be shoved downward into its origin, um in order to be exposed to the conditions of its expression, rather than I mean, I think Lacan himself was deeply concerned with how psychology, I mean, everything effective about psychology is appropriated from Freud, ends up being appropriated from Freud, and Freud's attentiveness and sensitivity to the need for psychic, for the heterogeneity of repression, for confronting the emergence of symptoms, for passing them on to other people, making, I mean, that the fact that the symptom is always something that something something that is trying to be expressed but can't be borne out by the person who is begging for help. Um, yeah. But then, I mean, the situation is truly dire because it just falls on people who are not who are too immersed in the phenomena. I mean, I guess that's how I view our situation, is that we are, if only we were more, if only we had more distance from what it is we're trying to figure out, then it would be much easier. But because we
Hmm.
are so thoroughly immersed in it, it just is so difficult to and of course and then the academic psychologists can pretend like they are making great strides when they are recapitulating the worst versions of the most vulgar expressions of the very thing that is supposed to be subject to questioning.
Right.
Hmm.
If
Yeah.
I wanted to make a quick point on what I think the issue is with this conception of parasocial, is like, I mean, I think parasocial, if you just look at that word, it can sort of mean two things. Like people take it in the first sense of like there's just a social relation that's happening at a distance. So that's why you can have the question of like, do you like this person? Are you attracted to this person? Do you align or identify with this person or not? Whereas for me, I feel like the actual like, so I guess like the main operation happening there is like this it is actually happening within the social field, that as you like correctly point out, a lot of parasocial, like a lot of things that actually happen when we're talking about sort of parasocial interactions, are like not social interactions but like antisocial interactions, because at least for me, like I sort of mainly read parasociality as like um positing of a copy in place of a social relation. And honestly, like a lot of what the parasocial is to me is like it's like entirely immaterial. The social at all, like I do see it a lot more as almost like a question of art and like symbols and signs, and like the sort of individual's relation with those things as like almost like objects, versus like an actual social interaction where there's some sort of resistance happening immediately. Because I mean that sort of same thing can be happening, but I think when you're in an actual place of interaction, I mean, maybe using such language, like once there's the actual well, if the reciprocity is more immediate, I think you kind of approach what we commonly understand to be like what a social interaction is. But I think like the main thing for me for like what constitutes the parasocial is that you might be sort of generating the same feelings that would be happening in a social relationship, but it's not so much like that the person is absent, but it's that the person doesn't have to exist at all for everything to be working. And that happens with like the sort of copying and like reusing of signs that don't suggest any presence, and all of this works only because the object that maybe takes the place of a person or an avatar is like inaccessible. The fact that it is inaccessible is like where all these is like the starting point for like further operations for like the audience member or like the consumer or the fan. Um yeah. And I mean yeah, that's pretty much it.
I mean, I guess I have a I mean maybe this is compatible, maybe distinct. Uh and like what I find kind of like swerves away from or can't articulate in the way that I would want him to is there's a kind of automatic process of emergence of agency from seriality in his view. Uh, it could be a malevolent agency, um, uh, and, of which would be characterized by a certain um, heaviness being dragged down by adherence to certain unnecessary assumptions about what is an unnecessary condition of historicity. I mean, that's what would be kind of clinging to scarcity, the human clinging to scarcity, uh, stumbling on its own transcendence. I mean, I think in Sartre's view, that's kind of how it goes. I think of parasociality as in many ways nothing new. Um, I view it kind of in line with its original formulators, who were not psychologists in the way that I've been characterizing, although they aren't innocent of a they're kind of maybe guilty by association. Um, but they are speculative thinkers, these American anthropologists, sociologists, and they were thinking of parasociality as a kind of ritual, a kind
Mhm.
of modern
Yes.
ritual. And
Mhm.
so to take the Twitch case again, you know, the capacity for an agent to both at once supervise the transformation of seriality into a fused group, and then also the kind of meta subsumption of that aid of that supervisor into an object that is circulated through the group like how women are circulated as a commodity in primitive society. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, I think um, that I mean, ritual ultimately is not even the right word because it that presumes a certain priority of rules, which are downstream from, I think, the dynamic which I just described. So, but like you could apply that to
Yeah, like for me, I guess maybe beyond ritual, if I were to say it more wordily, would be like allowing for like the staging of projection or projection of like copies or things that you already have like access to or like understand almost. Yeah, because I mean, also for me, I think it's either speed of mind where I was like semi crashing out over the fact that when I was going through like Lewin's part of the social system, when he was describing the development of theater, it's like the way theater was being described was like exactly how people would maybe understand like the parasocial emerging like 20th century with like television or something, where like the audience and the actor are both projecting onto each other. Um, I guess I can maybe pull up the exact page because I know I have that written down. Yeah, but I mean, one point I didn't make is that I mean for me like the real scandal of the parasocial is that it's the social like I really don't believe there is a social that is not parasocial like really in like the final analysis only because I view like socialization as something that you do to yourself because there's no like real way you can kind of cross the operative boundary of this maybe like the inert matter practice if we don't research in terms of like
The woman
society
does not
and
exist
this
type stuff.
communication
I get what you
um
mean.
to like psychic operations in your head you know, it uses it as like a supply, but ultimately the one who's socializing is you yourself to yourself. Um,
Well, that's the DOS. That's why the Dasein is the commencement of a logical essence to that disturbs any anthropological kind of constellation. I mean, we are have one foot out of any social arrangement, but um, that that incomplete inclusion is itself can itself be taken as an object that carries a certain amount of information or even crucial information. Like I think I what comes to mind is and of course I again as Amakai said each of these media have their own temporality. So I mean that's what makes it difficult to generalize. But I think of uh well, it's not specific to YouTubers, although I feel as though I've seen it most zealously expressed through YouTubers. But often you will have, I guess, micro celebrities or just parasocial personae in general mourn or decry to and to their audience um, bad audience members. You know, people who are too invested or invested in the wrong reason for invested for the wrong reason in the parasocial persona, and that's being spoken by the persona. So what you seem to have is a some kind of I mean how these first guys were portraying it, who coined the term is as a performance of a social type. Like you had these, talk show hosts who are, um, I mean, maybe in precisely the words you were using, a kind of mimicry, a kind of field of projection of an ideal father, an ideal friend, an ideal wife, and the audience can kind of engage in it, and the anthropologists and sociologists in question who formulated the parasocial interaction theory are kind of optimistic about it in some sense. They are saying that it serves as a kind of antechamber for genuine social interaction, action in social action in a proximate context, real social action. Um, I mean, obviously, what they miss is that there is an antechamber for every social action implies an antechamber. Every
mhm,
social interaction implies some kind of intermediary moment, um, which is required in order to transform from a subject into an object that the other um, can that can bear the weight of the other's meaning. So that's why projection is a difficult term. I mean, on the one hand, it can't be eliminated, but I mean, it's never really. I mean, what I'm receiving of mine from the persona is uh, I mean, not so much like what I'm bringing, because I mean that's basically kind of the initial reaction, I think, to like why is so and so obsessed with um, their favorite YouTuber compared to other people who are more normal? Why are they so invested? Why do they sacrifice so much? Well, it's probably because they have something else going on, or they're lacking something in some other part of their life that they're bringing to this context. I mean, the first statistical modeling of parasocial interaction after this speculative first article in the 50s was about some American town and people's relationships to the weatherman on their local TV station, corresponding with loneliness. Um, how much they interact with others, how much time they spend with others, correlated to their positive evaluations along the lines I described of the local of the weather person, the people on the news. And so there's just an assumption that something is being kind of rechanneled. But there's absolutely no, in that study, and in ones after, there's no attention given to the circulation of significance by the dynamic that is in question, which is, what is actually made possible through this uh, initiatory setup that isn't just another version of something else or an illusory version of something else. Like you said, there's no, and of course, there's always been, I mean, the pressure needs to be released. And loneliness is no less a category of sociality than anything else, than friendship or um, uh, romance or so that again it is all a question of but I think the development of the concept has to ultimately include how this technological apparatus gets mobilized, which is can't be read as people do in terms of a kind of progressive epistemic isolation or something like that. Or I mean, obviously, I think as we know, it's if anything, the exposure to difference is magnified. But what is I mean, to use a term that is questionable, what is reifying about it is that it is uh I mean the persona who I attach myself to, who makes possible this transformation of seriality into a group, that they I mean, as I agree, they don't have to exist, and or their existence like from just is decentered. They go from this lateral or vertical relationship to a lateral one, and it's just this kind of uh, movement. And I think what is truly interesting is how someone can continually subject themselves into the process in that position, which is of course what none of the academic research is at all concerned with. It's always the audience member. It's always the spectator who is at the center of it, who is the bearing the responsibility of obsession or antisocial behavior, all this stuff. But I mean, really, I think the challenge would be to come up with even theoretically a way to measure.
Yeah, I got an idea about this.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I think of Lacan as the very first parasocial guy. Okay. And what I mean by that is we have a master's discourse, which is the speaker, that's the YouTuber. Then you have your university discourse, which is your loyal fans, your hegemony, your institution, so to speak, your discord, your guys, so to speak, your cult followers. And then you have the hysterics, which are the outsiders who feel betrayed or like they've been let down or whatever. Or they're saying, you're not that good, you master guy. You suck in some way. You suck. And they're right in a way. And then there's like where I position myself, the analyst discourse, the one above them all. The one above them all. The one above.
Yeah, I mean again, I think the emptiness of the real experience of social media, like as an use like the fact that it is an interface just puts everyone in an analyst position from the get-go because again, we the first thing that we do isn't actually to speak. It isn't to make a claim on someone. It is to observe. Um that is what is, I mean, if one wants to take on the point of view of the audience in an authentic way, I mean, one would have to begin there, prior to all articulations of identity or um, projection, introjection, um, just this, and that's where any valuative claims are born from initially, just from that position of analyzing what is happening. Um, and then you get, yeah, I mean, as you were saying, I mean, clearly the dynamic of the subculture is it's, I mean, without it there would be nothing to observe, really. There would be no drama. So
Yeah, it's
Funnily
like,
enough,
yeah,
oh wait, sorry. I just want to talk about we're talking about that's these studies in the 50s with like television. I mean,
mhm.
it's kind of and when you would brought up like there's some you're kind of ignoring like the circulation of what was it? The circulation of was it signs or I mean you can just put it simply as like the circulation of communication about like the thing. I mean, there's like no question as to if something's appearing on TV, is it then and if it's even if it's in the shape of a person, it's still not a media object that has to be read in a certain way that the audience is taught to read in a certain way.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, every persona is like is a teacher of literacy de facto.
every streamer's a Rorschach test.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
But go on, X.
well, yeah, I mean that was pretty much it. Wait, let me see. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense given the fact. I mean, if we can say with some certainty that the persona enables some kind of communication between members, it means that something like a code is established in this
Yep.
vertical relation, but it's
Yes.
not at all a normative. I mean, it's not a normative relation in the sense that the rules of interaction are located completely at the level of lateral.
And
Um,
It becomes its own meta language, is what I've thought of it
mhm,
as.
can we situate the discussion maybe a little bit with respect to Freud's what's it called? The group psychology
mhm.
one.
Yeah, yes, totally. Y-
Oh, like
Yeah, the
to put it
identified
bluntly, for me,
ideal.
what
Yep. Yeah.
except for the absence of what Sartre gives as what sets apart the radio broadcast is basically that there's no uh proximate no present proximate enough presence proximate enough to allow for any kind of immediate action, right? So again, it goes to a kind of temporality of the agency that it's involved. But other than that, what would be the difference at all? uh, Not a rhetorical question for me. That's an entirely open question because I don't know the discourse about parasociality. What would be the difference between the position that the leader or whatever or whoever is in the leader position takes for the group where the laterality is an effect of the shared identification with it,
So
with
in a way,
him
I
or
feel
her.
like you're asking, what is an ethical master? And I think
Well,
an ethical master is somebody who's just demonstrates their own castration in a way. But in a way, demonstrating your castration also hurts your credibility at some point. So you can't constantly be parading it. So it's a tough lesson. It's a hard thing to navigate. It's a hard thing to navigate.
Um, I think you're right on. I mean, in some way, yeah, no difference. I mean, I think the Freud, the that group psychology essay is uh is so crucial. I also, I mean, you're kind of recapitulating the whole seminar I had set up for these kids because I also had them read that, and I was
mhm.
really I was quite nervous about giving them Freud, and some things ended up happening that I was had to deal with because of the name. I mean, it's so hard to teach
Yeah, yeah.
psychoanalysis. But in that essay, if I remember correctly, he talks about a hypothetical kind of primal matriarchy. Um, I could be confusing it with a different. Um, yeah. He kind of just adds in this crazy. I'm just going to put it on the screen because I think it is. It's it's relevant, and I know it's late, so we can stop soon. But um, so he says, if you can see, uh, return to the scientific myth of the father of the primordial horde. We talked, Amakai, we did have a little bit about this on the first week, on the about this myth of the slaying of the primal father.
Mhm.
He was later elevated to the position, Freud says, of creator of the world, rightly so, since he had fathered all the sons who made up the first mass. He was the ideal of each one of them, simultaneously feared and worshipped, which for a later age gave rise to the notion of taboo. That plurality came together one day, killing and dismembering him. None of the mass victors was able to take his place, or if one of them did so, the fighting resumed until they realized that they must renounce their father's inheritance. Then they formed the totemic brotherhood, all enjoying equal rights and bound together by the totem bands that they were to keep the memory of the murder alive and atone for it. However, dissatisfaction with what had been achieved remained and became the source of fresh developments. Gradually, those who had united in the fraternal mass drew closer to a restoration of the old state of affairs at a new level, and the husband once again became head of family, breaking the prerogatives of the matriarchy that had become established during the fatherless period. So he just sort of interjects this hypothesis that
With no
this
patriarch, there must be matriarch. With no patriarch.
yeah, in the interval, I mean, basically, if we were to, inter kind of hypothesizing anxiety at the level of the species, we have this interval between the slaying of the father and then the kind of fraternal reconstitution of patriarchy with a castrative qualification. Between those 2 points, you have this matriarchal organization, and I mentioned this just because uh, the the yeah in the notion of the leader in this group psychology is not quite not identical to what Weber calls patriarchal authority. Um, and I taught this mass psychology thing together with this Weber
Mhm.
on types of, you have patriarchal authority, traditional authority, hereditary rule.
Mhm.
You have bureaucratic authority by appointment, by election of whatever kind, and then charismatic authority.
Mhm.
And the problem, I mean, Weber is good, but the social typology is suffers from what every Kantian kind of proto transcendental theory suffers from, which is this the finite categories of authority. I mean, the whole question becomes hybrid relations and interpenetration, which Freud, I think, the benefit of Freud is that, and of psychoanalysis, he begins at the level of the genesis of any possible typology, and then obviously the psychology with its diagnostic fervor it ends up going just hyperspeed. But the this libidinal responsibility that is invested in the leader in Freud's group psychology is kind of mediating between the complete disorientation involved in this what is obviously a hypothetical. I mean, he calls it a scientific myth, the slaying of the primal father. It's this notion of an equilibrium that is removed, and cognitively it has a certain value, and then the need to
Yeah.
reconstitute. So the leader is between it. It has this matriarchal function in enabling a kind of stasis between those two. Because a group, I mean, the formation of a group, it's not, I mean, by virtue of the scarcity that defines it, to use the Sartrean term, it isn't a reconstituted order at the level of civilization. And the reason why civilization is discontented with itself is because it isn't a reconstituted patriarchal order in the full sense in which it wishes to be. And so his theory of group formation, the church, the army, whatever you take, all of them have their own establish a threshold of membership, a sense of temporality that is concomitant with that threshold and the implied forms of initiation, the scarcity that is traded among the members. I mean, it has this non kind of post and pre-paternalistic character. I mean, Freud, I mean, I think again, how Lacan reads Freud, how one has to read Freud is it's not um what would be needed in order to find its relevance for political praxis. Not in the sense of like uh how do I operate as a leader, or what is the best kind of group or best kind of leadership, but at the level of um, interactions between groups that define the social field in which any political agent comes of age. It's at that level that Freud is kind of he cannot really he doesn't can't really go there. So I think that would just be the flaw. But I think
Yeah,
the
Freud never gives a good like he's never like groups can be good. He never says that. He's never like there are good groups. He does not believe that. He doesn't is what I think. Or that's what
Mhm.
I've gotten from other people's evaluations of his group psychology. Where he's
Yeah,
just like groups are dangerous, bro. Groups are dangerous.
or the valuation of groups, I mean, in terms of good or bad, is like the name of the political game.
Yeah.
He can't go that. He can't go to that.
Then I almost wonder, so does that group formation only happen after the slaying of the father?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Right,
that's a
okay.
mhm.
Okay, so that tracks only because I feel as if with that idea of the father, then like all everyone who's like subject to him doesn't really so much constitute a group as so much like in like a subjected aggregate to like the power of the father. I mean, they're almost like just extensions of him as an individual, whereas like once he's gone, once everyone is sort of free to start presuming and projecting, like if there's like a more like lateral structure there, then there's actually like there actually are like multiple individuals or people were converging onto something rather than like sort of being subject to
Exactly. Yeah, I
the
mean
individual.
that's
Yeah.
why this yeah, pre-lapsarian condition of before the slaying of the primal father, it's correlate in terms of illusory beginnings, psychic beginnings. Its correlate is the amniotic fluid in the womb, this oceanic, this monadic
Mhm.
identity. And then after, then you have separation into individualities, and uh, then you have group formation, which is composition, a
Right.
product of composition.
So if that happens while we have this
What I think what
matriarchy,
both the primal the father of the primal horde shares actually with the implied stage of presumably particularized matriarchs a matriarchy of in each case a mother, unless we're talking about the actual authority of a mother, but I don't think that's what's implied there. I think we're talking
yeah.
about a dispersion that is before uh, what I can only call a gathering. So, so what this group formation at the or the institutions get their own uh, subsistence is this
Mhm.
gathering, is this logos that is involved uh, in identifying, laterally identifying with the same one.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just kind of funny thinking about it in these terms because then my mind immediately goes to like, well, then it's like sort of every sort of parasocial actor or object then castrated. Which, if I think about
Hmm.
it, it's like, yeah, that
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, they are. That's the
They
crazy
are.
thing is like they are, bro. Yeah.
Wow, I never thought about that. Yeah, that totally tracks. Especially because I also think like you can definitely have parasocial relations with like fictional characters. I mean that's literally all that's ever happening in anime subculture
Hmm.
all the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
that's like super obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no, like, because then if psychologists can't recognize that, then they're like, how can you have,
I
you
mean, this
know?
becomes very obvious
Yeah,
with
they
idols, which is
always
why they're
view
like a main
the
fixation and
parasocial
fascination of
object
mine.
as like
Hmm.
this mystical father of the horde or whatever. Not they never view him as castrated, which is yeah.
Yeah, and of course, as the more that the persona insists on their omnipotence, the more that they will. Um,
The more they
but
prove
of
they're castrated,
Yeah, but of
the more they
course
prove they're
that
castrated.
that it's not necessarily not in their favor. I mean, I think that's the other thing, is that the dynamic which would remove, um, in Weber's terms, the charismatic authority also always has to prove their mandate or whatever. I think that the dynamic of if they have, um, I mean, I think that dynamic depends on their sensitivity to the relationship, to the castrative condition. If you like Saint Paul is, this notion of an apostle, like, what is that? It's not at all, he just invents it. um but the position of the apostle in relationship to Christ is deeply empowering I mean, and it enables Paul to generate this political theology that becomes the foundation for the institution of the church, and then its assimilation and mediation of an empire. But it can't, it's not I am God. That statement is something that is more at the level of found kind of structuration upstream from this, parasocial authority that is necessarily, draws its power from its condition of castration. I mean, that's again, that also
Yeah.
why the medieval, since I have been teaching some history, this medieval situation between the king and the pope, both apparently servants of God. It can go on for so long, even though it seems from a modern perspective completely absurd. How could you maintain an authority that is expresses itself in the form of subservience?
Yeah, divine right of kings didn't show up till like 1570s or whatever.
Only after the Reformation. Yeah,
Yeah.
only after the king said, I am the head of the church, and then everyone can say that. Um, I mean, we could obviously keep go on, but maybe this is a good point to stop, unless anyone has any final comments or
Wait, I
Um,
got one more
I,
comment I'm typing out.
go ahead. Yeah,
No,
yeah. All of you go ahead. But first, yeah, X, go ahead.
no, no, I'm typing. So
Okay.
you can speak on that pad.
I want to say that first of all that I've been hearing like with a little bit of delay. So if there's also a problem on my end, then I will just stop talking. So tell me. Uh, but I wanted to bring it back just to wrap it up for me. To I made mention before of the problematization of writing in Phaedrus, and I think it belongs to a cluster of issues around Socrates and exactly. Uh, 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 but one who's very much concerned, either himself or Plato who's writing him, with how limited his power is, and with how manipulable he is. And writing is, in a way, just uh, uh, or the problematization of writing or of being in the form of a book is this uh, hard limit on your power to answer back, which is basically what the living Socrates is all about. Uh, and so, so the paradox of writing Socrates is always.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me, but you cut out. But we got most of what you are saying.
Small dialogue called the Cleidophone. I don't know if you know about it, because it's one of those possibly apocryphal ones, so not everyone reads it. But the reason that it has been in some periods, I don't think.
Oh yeah, you cut out again.
He's speaking in a weird, still third person. Somebody told us that you were saying bad things about us to another guy. So what's that all about? And then Cleidophone answers that basically with a short, convoluted speech that mischaracterizes everything that happens in a bunch of dialogues, all shoved together, and then there's no response from Socrates. Pardon me, I'm just walking uphill now. Anyway, so to me, I'm not suggesting that that's the way to read it, but to me, this clicks as a way of dramatizing the being book of that just offers itself for this misreading of Cleitophon without being able to answer it. And Cleitophon, by the way, is together with the Lysis, the characters in the Politeia that are in the conversation, but they just overhear it and do not participate. Lysis says nothing, and Cleitophon only says one thing and he bungles like what was said right before. He attributes to Socrates what Thrasymachus says, or something like that. Anyway, so he's like the avatar of the guy that will just run away with what you're saying right away and like bring it back to you as kind of spoiled. Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I think that's all very relevant, and in connection with some of the discussion in the chat. I mean, I think to just put it as simply as possible, castration. The meaning of castration is not being misunderstood. It's or not the fact of, or even the necessity of being misunderstood. It's as a person being transformed into an object which
Yeah.
carries a meaning that is required. So it's very good that we are misunderstood because if we weren't, then there would be much less to talk about. That would be a kind of
Yep.
paradoxical way to put it, but not maybe the most scientific way. I think, I mean, again, more fundamentally, the heroic aspect of being a persona is that you lend yourself as a person that you have been taught to represent yourself as into this object relative to the kind of automatic circuit of significance that's located in otherness. And you can try to claw back any sense of personhood if you like, but the one does that at their own risk. And so I guess, but before we tune out, two comments. I guess I wanted to read one from Brian who came in, and thank you for coming in. Um, from slightly earlier, on streaming, a fellow called Limmy, and an interesting aspect of his output, he pitches himself watching and commenting on very old British television from his own childhood. And so there's a kind of mourning of old demolition of old parasocialities, almost cannibalistic on I suppose the point is that on the through the medium of the new parasociality. And yeah, so please do send some YouTube links. That'll be good for me. And then X has a good formula attached to a song on the omnipotence of the castrated idol. And then also one more comment that understanding between understanding and misunderstanding, understanding does not have to be correct. Many students often misunderstand me. Doesn't prevent lectures from being held. Rather the opposite. If they always immediately understood, I assume this is maybe Luhmann, always immediately understood there would not be much need for lectures. A failed exam based on a complete misunderstanding does not at all function less as communication than a good exam. Oh, Moeller on Luhmann. Okay, very nice. Thank you everyone again. This was good. Very helpful for me. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your preference, the quantity of pages that we're reading will dramatically decrease. And so on the you can see on the syllabus what from the Lacan we will be reading. I don't have it in my head at the moment, but you can see it. I think it's about 30 or 40, 30 to 50 pages, probably on the lower end. So that's for next Sunday, and I look forward to seeing everyone. And I'll put the recorded video just up in the next few days, probably. All right.
All right.
Thank
See
you
ya.
very much. Thanks,
Thanks.
guys.
Thanks to you all.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, Angel. Thank you for coming.